Hi. So yeah, my name is Marianne Miller. I'm Martin's wife, for those of you who don't know who I am. And he's currently falling behind on work and stuff like that, so he asked me to step in and do an episode for him since I, like many others, have experiences with depression. And I also have experience with different things that he might not. So he thought I might have a nice different perspective from other people. So without further ado, we're still here. For those of you who don't know, I'm covered in tattoos. Yeah. I have several tattoos, and my tattoos make me very happy. But the story of how I got my first tattoo is kind of important. That's the one that means the most to me. I have this tattoo here, which is like a robot arm, steampunky thing. I have an Assassin's Creed tattoo behind my ear. I have an orchid on my foot. I have Spaghetti, our cat that just died last year. I have his paw print tattooed on my thigh. And I have a phoenix on my shin. And the phoenix was the first one I got. And I got it after I was raped. I was raped 5 years ago, and then I got the tattoo about 6 months after that. And that was easily one of the lowest points of my life to date, hopefully ever. It was 2009, and I hated my life, and I wanted to do something different. My dad was a teacher when I was a kid, and he always went to Europe on class trips and stuff like that. He'd always chaperone that stuff. And he was also an MP during the Cold War in Berlin in the American sector of Checkpoint Charlie. So I heard a lot about Europe growing up, and he tried teaching me German. I'm not very good with German. But regardless, Europe was always something that was just kind of just out of reach, and I never got to go, and so I decided that I was done being responsible, even though I never got a college degree, which technically isn't responsible, but so yeah, I decided to be irresponsible. I was working 3 jobs at the time. I worked at Universal Studios as a character. I did voiceover work, and I worked at Square Enix as a GM for Final Fantasy XI. So I moved out of my apartment, and I quit my full-time job, and I went on hiatus at Universal for the longest amount of time that they would allow me to be gone, and I saved up money, and I flew to Europe in May, and it was going to be a 3-month trip, and I went to the UK, and I went to Germany, and then eventually we ended up in Italy, and in Florence, in Italy. And we had been couch surfing for 4 or 5 weeks at this point, and we hadn't run into any issues, but when we arrived in Italy, the guys we were staying with, we stayed with them for 3-4 days, and then on the last night before we were going to leave, they took us to a bar, and I don't know if I had too much to drink or if something was given to me or what. I tried to be really careful, but apparently I wasn't careful enough. So that night I ended up getting raped with the girl I was traveling with in the next room. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Fear kind of dictated a lot of what I did then. And fear is always a huge motivating force in everyone's life, regardless of what happens to them. So I stayed for another week to try and redeem what was left of the trip, but I was too busted at that point to enjoy it or to really know what to do or what was going on or anything. So I flew back home And after about a month or so, I was tired of being upset, and I went to therapy. And during therapy, you know, I mean, I was never medicated because my depression was more situational than chemical. And so my therapy, and it was free, by the way, for anyone who was attacked. There are resources that you can look into at the your local police station. They put me in touch with these people, and I got 16 sessions for free. So yeah, like I started doing therapy, and there was a lot of stuff they had me do. They had me like writing was the most effective way that I chose to manifest my feelings and my thoughts and how I decided to deal with things. I've been journaling since I was a kid, like a lot of people, and I just took it a step further, and I did this thing a lot where I would write stories involving fictional characters, only they weren't really fictional characters. They weren't the fictional characters, or rather, I'd projected a little bit too strongly onto them. And at the time, well, even before, I've always loved this manga called Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles. And there were these two characters specifically in that manga that I really, really loved, Kurogane and Fai. And I loved both of them together. I loved them both individually. Like, I thought they were a great pair in a romantic and a sexual sense, I guess. And I also loved them, you know, on their own, by their own merits. I thought they were cliches in their own way, but every character is when it comes down to it. But when I first started reading the manga, I really loved Kurogane, and as I was doing therapy more, I really started to relate very closely to Fai. I mean, to avoid any ridiculous specifics that no one cares about. He was the type of character that always had a smile on his face regardless of the mood. He would deflect with humor. He would avoid serious conversations, but on the inside he was broken, essentially. And so during that period of time, I basically felt like a shell. There was nothing inside of me that worked. There was nothing that was worth speaking about, that was there, that wasn't rotting in some way, because you just don't feel like yourself. So I faked a lot. That sounds terrible, but I mean, you do what you can to continue living life in the most effective way possible. And I did that. So, you know, you keep smiling and you keep talking and you keep doing things to try and keep everything as normal as you can, because that's the only way that you know how to live. So, Fai, I don't want to say we became very close because he's a fictional character, but you know what I mean. I related very closely with him, and I, you know, writing fan fictions or whatever about him as me, or, you know, experiencing situations that I found myself in, was very helpful to me. So after a while, I started feeling better. I got a new job at a karaoke bar. I was working at Universal again, which had its own challenges. And I was doing voiceover. So I was keeping busy and making money, and my friends were very kind, and they let me stay with them until I felt better. And when I first started reading the manga, when I was 18 or something, I really loved Fai's tattoo. He had this huge tattoo of a phoenix all over his body, and I was like, that is the coolest thing I have ever seen. Oh, I want it. I've always wanted tattoos, and I've always loved tattoos. Nice tattoos. But I was too scared to get it. I didn't know if I wanted to get the huge, big, like, no, the version that it was actually supposed to be, where the entire phoenix took up the length of his spine, or if I just wanted a smaller version or whatever. But I knew that I wanted it, and I wanted it for 3-4 years, but I just never got it because I was too afraid. And finally, one night when I was working at the karaoke bar, there was a guy there that I had a crush on. But he came and he showed me a tattoo that he had just gotten done, like the day before, however early. And I was like shocked that he had just gone and done it. It was his family crest, and he was all excited about it. And it, like, there was something in my brain that like clicked, that was like, I can have this. I can have whatever I want to have, because it's not a responsible approach, but I was like, I have a credit card and I'm an adult. There's no reason why I can't do this. And I decided that, not only would this tattoo be me getting something that I've wanted for, at the time, 4 or 5 years. Now it's about a decade. But not only would this be like me getting what I wanted after so long, but it would be me conquering this fear of everything, change and like permanence, or like the situation that I had been in the first place, to be attacked and to do all of this stuff. And like I decided that this would be a mark that I had on myself to prove that I was changed permanently, and whether it was for the better or for worse, it didn't matter, because it was I had proof that I wasn't the person I was before I left for the trip. And so I got it done, and it was great. It was the weirdest thing, looking at it for the week or two or however long after. I would spend so much time looking at this tattoo, and like I was enamored with it, because I felt like this part of my body that had the ink on it was like somehow snapped into place, and that this felt right. This was something that was supposed to be there, and something that I connected with very deeply. And I feel that way about tattoos, period, regardless of, I realize that now, to me anyway, that I feel like there are two different kinds of people. There are people who should have tattoos, and there are people who should not have tattoos. And when I say should, I don't mean like any sort of like judgmental approach to it or whatever. I mean, there are people who don't feel like they are supposed to be decorated, and that's just how they feel about themselves. And then there are people who do feel like they should be decorated, and like with every tattoo that they get, and I mean with every tattoo that I get, I feel like a new part of me is being actualized that was supposed to be there in the first place. All these little designs that I get done are me just bringing to light what was there under the skin. They're not putting things into my skin, they're peeling the skin off and being like, oh, this is the real you. And it's this great feeling getting this work done, and it's not just from the adrenaline or the shock or whatever it is. I'm sure that's part of it as well, because there is an addictive side to getting tattoos, unfortunately. But there's also something really deeply personal about it. And I'm of the opinion that tattoos don't necessarily have to mean something. It's great if they do, and there's nothing wrong with putting a lot of thought into what you get done on your body. But I also don't understand the hostility towards people that get designs that they may or may not have been wanting since the moment they came out of the womb, or something that didn't represent dead XYZ, or this tragic event that happened that they need to remember, and stuff like that. Like for instance, I've always felt like I really wanted sleeves, and currently I just have the one. Maybe I'll be brave enough to get the other, I don't know. But ultimately, like, it doesn't matter what I put here. What matters is there's something there. And that's the, I mean, and the same with the paw print that I have on my thigh. The paw print that I have on my thigh is over a birthmark that I had that was in the shape of an animal's paw. And so ultimately, like, I did it in remembrance of spaghetti, but I also did it to sort of snap that back into place because the birthmark started fading, and it was always like this nice little reminder of the relationship that I've had with animals, and you know, all the animals I've had and all the animals I have right now and will have in the future. So it's just, I don't know, there's some sort of indescribable joy that comes with getting a new tattoo, and the time where you're doing the aftercare and cleaning it, and you're, you know, it's a bonding process. It's becoming reacquainted with yourself and that part of your body that you've gotten redone, so to speak. With that being said, I'd like to lead into the other part of the video, namely talking about PTSD and what exactly triggers are and what triggering is, and the importance of trigger warnings. When I went into therapy, I was diagnosed as depressed with suicidal, you know, tendencies, and also mild PTSD. I never actually wanted to kill myself. I just wanted to not be alive. And I'm sure that's a common feeling that a lot of people have. But killing myself was just never an option that popped into my brain. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about if this were happening to me again, that I don't think I could live anymore, but that's not something that crosses my brain at all now. But regardless, PTSD was something that I dealt with for quite a few months after, and some people deal with it for years and years, depending on what exactly caused the PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can be brought on by a lot of different things. It can be brought on by combat or war situations. It can be brought on by rape. It can be brought on by violent crime. It can be brought on by birth, like birthing a child. A traumatic situation can cause post-traumatic stress disorder, depending on how healthy or unhealthy the mind is at the time. Yeah. So regardless, I ended up getting, I have PTSD and having flashbacks and panic attacks and all these other things. A lot of people don't seem to understand exactly what PTSD is. And for a lot of people, it is different. For me personally, like I said, flashbacks, which means your brain just kind of shuts down and you're right back where you were. Or panic attacks, where, I mean, panic attacks are just, you feel like you're gonna die and that everything is crumbling around you, and there's no logical reason for it. It's just something that's happening and you can't breathe and you can't think and you can't do anything except for just sit there and freak the fuck out. And also just, I mean, you know, being depressed or whatever. There was one time where I was eating a carrot, eating a baby carrot, and something about the way that it felt reminded me of the way that this person felt as they were taking advantage of me. And I freaked out. Like, I was back in the room and I was just crying, and I like had to get them away from me, and it was something that I just couldn't control and I didn't understand, and I don't know. There was another time where I was in a sex shop. Somebody had the genius idea to take me there shortly after, and I had to leave because my mind just kept wandering and wandering and wandering in these really scary and upsetting directions, and I had to step out to control myself, basically, because I wasn't really in the mood to have a breakdown in public. Who knew? And I mean, there's the good old-fashioned panic attack. I remember watching a music video for Sex on Fire, and there was something about it where I was like, I don't like this, and I have to leave, and I had a panic attack outside, and, you know, it happens. You don't know where, you don't know when, you don't know why. But there are these things called triggers that can help, or that, if you're able to identify them, are the cause for that specific breakdown. So in my case, like, you know, I got triggered by the carrots, I got triggered by sexual imagery, I got triggered by even more sexual imagery, like, and also I was triggered by rape jokes, I was triggered by allusions to rape, I was triggered by graphic rape, just, you know, anything rape related. You're probably going to end up upsetting somebody who has been raped. That's a fair enough idea, anyway, or a fair enough, like, fucking thought. And so I started avoiding things that involved, at the very least, I started avoiding things that involved any sort of rape scenario or joke or whatever as best I could. Unfortunately, there's a lot of that just kind of flying around. But I did it as best I could until I got to a place where I could actually handle seeing that or reading it or consuming it in one way or the other, however it was presented to me. You know, until I progressed in therapy enough to feel comfortable with doing that and not feeling like I was going to have my brain shut down and have half the day lost to whatever emotions I would feel regardless of my consent or my wanting to have them. And that's why I think trigger warnings are really important, and I don't think people understand exactly what trigger warnings are. I think there are people who take trigger warnings too personally. They think that it's calling for censorship, and there are people who think that we should trigger warn literally everything. And obviously the actual, like, the right thing to do is somewhere in between those two answers, the happy medium between anarchy and 1984 of trigger warnings. Because ultimately when it comes down to it, I'm not, even though I was triggered by baby carrots, for whatever fucking reason, I'm not asking anybody to trigger warn baby carrots. And I don't think any reasonable person is. I know there is Tumblr. We all know Tumblr exists, and we all know there are certain communities on a bunch of different websites that have a lot of feelings about a lot of different things. But those people are extremists. Plain and simple. You can't take the extremists seriously. If you take them seriously, you legitimize their arguments, and then you just end up hurting a whole lot of people who are trying to help themselves and help a lot of other people. So yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind what could potentially, like, keep in mind, first of all, if you know somebody who's in this situation where they're easily triggered by content or whatever, or if you yourself are not feeling well enough to consume media or to, like, to consume media that involves potentially hairy things, then it doesn't make you unreasonable to ask that you either be excluded from whatever activities is happening, or that you take whatever precautions you can to protect yourself, including trigger warnings, or, you know, have somebody research something for you, or whatever, just to make sure that you're not pushing yourself into something that will essentially shut your brain down and make you unable to function for X amount of time. And I think that's what people don't understand about triggers and about PTSD, which is what trigger warnings are about. Trigger warnings are not for this makes me uncomfortable. Trigger warnings are not for this offends me. Trigger warnings are for something that makes someone completely unable to function until they're removed and are able to calm down. I was having a discussion with somebody on the internet, of all places, who was upset by the idea that we start trigger warning class content in colleges. And I don't understand why. I understand why, but I don't understand ultimately how it affects them or how it affects people who aren't affected by triggers. They were saying things like it doesn't allow people to intellectually stimulate or challenge themselves. To which I say they're intellectually challenging themselves every fucking day by dealing with these symptoms that you have no idea about and trying to function as a normal human being. That doesn't mean that they should be given a free pass for everything in every college class, and that we shouldn't talk about whatever literature or movies or whatever art that involves these sorts of themes. It means that we give people the chance to prepare themselves for what they're about to consume. Because just like anything else, some people want to make an educated decision about what they involve themselves in. Some people want to have GMOs labeled. Some people want to research their political party before they vote for their candidate, and some people don't. Some people want to, everyone wants to, there's so many people who want to make educated decisions about their lives, and I don't see how trigger warnings are any different. Trigger warnings on syllabi or on books or on whatever would essentially equate to a rating. For movies have the rating, and they have like, this is violent, there's naughty language, there is drugs, there is mischief. I think that is an actual rating. But those sort of like specific references to content, while sometimes silly, can help somebody make a decision as to whether or not they want to watch that thing, because an R-rated movie could be anything from V for Vendetta, which is, stylized and exaggerated and silly while still being dark, as opposed to an R-rated movie like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which features several graphic rape scenes throughout the series. And I know that that's something that I wouldn't be able to deal with if I were still dealing with symptoms of PTSD. And admittedly, I haven't seen it or read the books or whatever, simply because it's not something I really want to involve myself in. And that doesn't mean that I don't respect the content, and that doesn't mean I don't necessarily respect the choice to involve those sorts of actions in the content. It just means that I personally don't want to stress myself over something that ultimately I'm consuming to have fun. That's what it comes down to. And obviously, things get more tricky when it comes to structured college classes and things like that. But I don't think it hurts anyone to tell them, hey, this features graphic war scenes, where, a lot of people get into the military to get their college degree paid for by the U.S. government. So, of all things, we really should be including trigger warnings for at least combat situations or something similar, and a lot of women get raped in the military, a lot of women get raped, period. In college, that's another reasonable thing to expect that we get warned for, so we can at least, if we can't decide whether or not to include ourselves in it, we can at least prepare ourselves for it. We know it's coming, so it's not like that one fucking movie where the girl is like surfing and then all of a sudden the shark comes up and eats her arm off out of nowhere. Like, it just makes life a lot easier for a lot of people. It doesn't mean that we're censoring anything. It doesn't mean that anyone's asking for nothing to be made involving this subject material. It just means, hey, this is happening. So yeah, ultimately, I guess, be considerate of people and don't feel like you're being unreasonable for asking that people trigger warn reasonable things if you're suffering from those sorts of things. Again, if, like in my situation, you were raped, there's a lot of free resources for people like you to get help. If you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter because it happens to both people, or to both genders. Yeah, so you can go to rain.org, you can talk to your police station, or you could, look into therapy through your healthcare provider if you have it. And if you haven't got it, and you're in America, go get free healthcare. Do it. Okay. I think I'm done. So you guys have a good week. I'll see you next time. Yeah!
If you wish to reach me, you can find me at Yu-Gi-Oh! TAS on Twitter. And for all my other content, please visit team4star.com/LittleKuriboh. I hope you have a great day.